Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break IL, a look at speedrunning, game development, content creation, and everything in between. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for listening, watching. Oh man, it's so kind of you. I actually checked like iTunes or whatever it's called nowadays by Apple, and there's actually reviews on the podcast. So thank you all that have done that. It honestly goes a long way to helping the podcast. You're all too kind. Thank you very much. Today, I'm going to share a clip of an interview I did with the one, the only Brossentia from May of 2020. And this is the end of October in 2022. And RPG Limit Break just wrapped up. It's their first time back in person since COVID. And it was really fun and exciting to see that the event is back in person and that they are doing it safely and getting people together to do. If you're not familiar with RPG Limit Break, it's an awesome event that raises a bunch of money this year for NAMI, and which is a mental health organization. And RPG Limit Break has been around for a few years now, and one of the founders was Brossentia, and he actually shares a little bit about how that came to be and how that is a thing. And it's kind of interesting. It's almost tough to talk about that whole thing without mentioning some of the stories from GDQ, because Brossentia is one of the people who was at the very first SGDQ, not the first classic Games Done Quick, but the second event that they had, SGDQ, which he talks about having it at his sister's house. And he was a young lad wondering what the heck was going on. And he's also one of the people who was around for the very first Awful Block, which, if you're not familiar with Awful Block, it's a period during Games Done Quick, usually late at night, but it has changed from time to time, that features or focuses on games that some may consider aren't the best quality games. I don't know if that's the way to say it. I always feel like there are games that just don't get as much love as the other ones, right? I don't know, something like that. They're games like Virtual Highlight. If you've ever seen a clip of that or have seen anybody speedrun that game, that's the kind of game that gets featured during the Awful Block. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably pretty familiar with it. But I think there's some really fun behind the scenes stories that Brossentia shares about that. And I think it leads perfectly into a little discussion about Kusogrande and what the hell is Kusogrande, because it's really this awesome event that Brossentia puts on his channel that anybody can participate in. And it's these fun races for a lot of times games you may not have played before that aren't Mario Brothers. They're not Mega Man. They're not, they're not some of the traditional really, speed runs that serve a lot of different people that have big communities and that are maybe considered good speed runs, So I think it was a lot of fun to kind of get to hear about how these events came around and how they're still going today. RPG Limit Break just wrapped up. It seems like Brossentia is always doing Kusogrande, even though there are technically seasons to it, and a little bit about GDQ behind the scenes. I encourage you to go back and listen to the whole interview. And that is because we also talk a little bit about Bro's upbringing and how I just love how he's put himself out there. And I think for some that can help, relate to some issues that he's had to deal with in his life, but then also he's into performing and theater, just a whole bunch of interesting topics. And so if you enjoyed this clip, go back and listen to the whole damn thing, because I got to say, as I'm a huge fan, obviously you can probably tell, of Brossentia, and I was fortunate to have him on my couch for one of my GDQX runs. And there's a great story right there. Why don't I just share that really quick? How do you get somebody to be on your couch like that? I didn't know Brossentia at the time. And so I just sent him a message on Discord. Hey, I'd like you, any chance you'd want to perform, read out a little script and kind of act it out for my run for GDQS of Legend of Hiratoma? Sure, no problem. Hey, bang, that's how we met. And I think he was about half asleep when when that run happened, because it was literally 5 or 6 in the morning and his run was right after it. So it timed out perfectly. He may have forgot about it. Was a lot of fun. It was a great time. I'll even link to that Legend of Hiratoma run because it's got some great commentary by Brossentia. So getting back to the point, here is the little clip, the little interview with Brossentia. What a character. At some point, he's got to come back on, because I honestly could just listen to him talk for hours on end. So I hope you enjoyed this little moment with Brossentia. So when did you first then start discovering speedrunning? How was your introduction? What were some of the things that got you, when did you first hear about a speedrun?
Well, honestly, it's because of my sister. Back, I believe, between 2005 and 2007, that was when I was in Brazil. Long story short, back then I was a Mormon and a missionary, and I was out there being like, yo, hey, let's forsake all technology and live in some really crappy houses and go around and talk to people about religion. And Essentia, in the meantime, was like, ooh, video games. Brosentia's not here, and now I have all his games. And she discovered speedrunning, specifically the Speed Demos Archive forums, and started doing them. And one of the first projects that she worked on, I believe, was Final Fantasy IX, a segmented run, which actually held the record for a really long time. A lot of people basically didn't believe that RPGs could be speedrun at that time because of how long they would take. And she did it because I don't know. It's like, well, I have kids and I need to find a way to keep myself entertained. I'm going to just sit for hours with video games and let my husband take care of them for once. So when I got back, after I finished my bachelor's degree, I was living in my sister's house. She goes by Essentia, and they ended up hosting SGDQ there. And about a month before, she came to me and was like, hey, Brian, do you want to run a game for the marathon? And I was like, I've never done a speed run before, but sure. Yeah, let's do this. And she's like, okay, what game? And I'm like, it's a game where you go fast. Mirror's Edge is a game where you go fast. Let's go ahead and do that. I had a month. Okay, a month to learn this game, and it's not trivial. It still happened. I still did the run. It's just I was not exactly the best at it. It ended up being fine, though. It was a blast.
Well, since you brought it up, a lot of those early GDQ runs seemed a bit more, I want to say casual, because that's not the right term, but they were, they weren't the best, they weren't the world record holders in those games at the time, which I thought was real interesting about some of those early runs.
Well, I mean, GDQ originally started as a community thing, and charity was sort of an afterthought when they actually made the marathon. They were like, if we're going to be sitting around and playing games for this long, we might as well see if we can do some sort of charity. So they got it set up, and it ended up being a lot more successful than they expected. So I would say that at this point, it's definitely much more charity focused, but before it was largely a combination between community coming together and doing the charity.
Can you tell us a little bit about how RPG, what is it, and then how it kind of got started? Tell us a little bit about the story.
RPG Limit Break's a little bit more of a formal, you're going to practice a bit for it.
You got to go put the professional face back on there, right?
Yeah. For $5.95, you can go ahead and get all of your RPGs broken. No, our RPG Limit Break specifically is a speedrunning marathon for RPGs. Obviously, they tend to be a little bit longer. Back several years ago, there was a marathon called Crystals for Life, and it ended up falling apart for a few reasons. I think a lack of organization was a large part of that, and people really wanted to have an RPG marathon still go on, but knew that it couldn't keep going from that one. So some of us came together. We put together a new one that started at Essentia's house again, because I guess that's the birthplace of marathon.
Yeah, it has to be, apparently. If you're going to be successful, start your marathon at Essentia's house.
I was going to say, she has so many children that might as well have marathons as your children too,
Why not?
Anyways, so we came together, put on RPG Limit Break over at her house for a couple years, and ended up moving to some larger venues. That tends to generally focus on better games or games that people enjoy, although occasionally there are going to be bad video games in that marathon as well. It's been pretty successful as well. I can't remember the total that we hit last year. It was somewhere around $200,000 or $300,000 for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. But that has been fun, and I think that just because of where I was and who I was talking to at that time is largely why I got involved with that. Because I don't speedrun very many RPGs these days. They take too long, okay? They're so long. But at the same time, I love people's passion. And again, it was a large part of the community. The community wanted to keep an event going. And because I was related to Essentia and rather excited about Final Fantasy IV for a time, that's largely how I got involved in helping that come about.
Did it start? Was there a fundraising or charity aspect to it when it started? And how was that, or how and why is that important to the whole thing?
Oh, yeah, there certainly was. They knew that they wanted to do charity. In fact, they still wanted to carry on the charity from the previous marathons, Crystal for Life. That would be with JDRF. But we started looking. I actually went and met with several different charities, and we met with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And during that meeting, I actually found out that the person who was helping, who was the head over in Utah, was from my high school and actually graduated with me. And it was just so surreal, because I was like, you do not look at all like I knew you. I knew you before. You are nothing like what I thought you were. And it was a really cool way to reconnect with a friend. Not only that, but she ended up offering tons of things and tons of help in order to help this event take off. I think that is something that can sometimes be a little bit difficult. Charities are interested in the idea, but they don't really know how to help get the marathons kicked off. And she just threw everything at us to help. Yeah, one day it was about 4 or 5 years ago, I was sitting around thinking, I would love to put on a show to bring people together and have them experience some of these games, because there are so many bad games out there, just dumpsters full. Okay. And finally, I just realized what I can do is put on the show. It took about 15 minutes of planning. I put together Google Docs and sent it online. Honestly, I had no idea that it would be going after 1 year. I thought it would be a one and done thing, but it's.
What was the first game played on Kusogrande?
Oh my gosh. Look, I'm going to have to look this up. Just a second. Just a second. No problem. Okay, I've got the document here. Don't panic. Back to the Future, NES.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Classic. That's a great one to start with.
Yep. Then Wizard of Oz for Super Nintendo, followed by RoboCop 3 for the Super Nintendo as well.
Never played that one, but I love it.
Well, don't.
Okay, we've definitely getting some questions about Kusogrande. So how did the name come about? How did you name the...
I was trying to think of a name that would work for the tournament. And I actually asked Twitter. I'm like, I want to put on a bad video game tournament. I don't want to have something that just sounds boring. Any ideas? And I can't even remember who it was. There was just some random person on Twitter. It was like Kusogrande. And I'm like, this is perfect. This is perfect, because it's a portmanteau of Kuso or Kusoge, which is generally bad video games. It's also a swear in Japanese.
Oh,
yeah.
Dual purposes. There you go. Perfect.
And I'm like, this is going to be a PG-13 stream, but whatever. The title can have a swear in it.
There you go.
Cool. And then Grande, Spanish for big. And simply put, making a portmanteau of two words from two different languages was probably the most disgusting thing that I had heard. And I thought it was perfect.
Did it start out as a race or as a competition between players, or was it something different in the early going?
Oh no, it was still in the race format. In general, the winners bracket, they had to play 2 hours instead of one, which is what we generally do now. So 2 hours in a game, and then whoever went to the losers bracket, they all played bootlegs. The losers bracket was 100% bootleg. So good.
Quasi asks a good question. What defines a bad game? It's a fair question, but
it depends. Okay, because
right?
No.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and say that there are objective ways to determine whether a game is good or bad. And let me just say that there's a difference between bad and unenjoyable and then bad and enjoyable. And mostly, I think when people think of bad video games, they just think low quality or, something that they didn't spend much time on. And that generally isn't the case. A lot of the times, a lot of work is put into these games, but there are big deadlines. So the biggest thing that I dislike when it comes to bad video games are the ones that end up being mediocre. That is, The gameplay is very formulaic, very boring, and it generally ends up not being too interesting to watch. And then bad games that end up being more enjoyable are the games that actually tried something new and horribly failed at it. Those, I think, are genuinely enjoyable. You know, if you think about Athena being ported from arcade to NES, on arcade, it had many systems that generally weren't found in old school NES games because they were complicated. So figuring out how to crack those apart and fit those into an older console, they failed absolutely terribly, and they failed with the music, and everything about it is pain. But at the same time, there's something intriguing about how bad it was put together. Another game like that, Kid Cool for the NES, but created by Vic Tokai. That game specifically has physics that you will never find in any other NES video game. And the reason is that they're really bad, but they tried something new. And honestly, it's one of the fastest paced video games. When you play it well, it's one of the fastest paced video games on the NES.
Thanks everyone for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free, subscribe, like, leave a comment, all that stuff people say at the end of a video. It honestly all goes a long way to help the podcast. Thank you so much. If you want to join us on Discord, we chat mostly about food, but occasionally we do talk about the stuff that's in the podcast. The link is in the show notes or in the description. Feel free. Come on by, join us. If you want to follow on Twitter, Sequence Break PC. Sequence Break PC. I post when I go live. It's kind of not at a set time, so if you want to see the live feed of the podcast, feel free, follow there. And finally, if you want to email, podcast@sequencebreakpodcast.com. Sequencebreakpodcast.com is also where you can find the backlog of all of the episodes. It's also on YouTube as well, so feel free, join in, have some fun. Thank you so much. I will see ya in the next one.